The Supreme Court just issued an order that could change everything for gun owners overnight. This move flew under the radar for many, but it signals that local carry bans are in serious trouble right now. This is not just a distant legal debate for lawyers in robes, it is a direct hit on rules that affect where you can go today. If you carry a firearm for protection, this order might be the most important thing you hear all year. Many people think they know the rules, but this development shows the ground is shifting beneath our feet. We are looking at a major move from the High Court that could strike down gun-free zones across the country very soon. You need to understand this before you make a mistake that could cost you your freedom. Local governments have been trying to ignore the Supreme Court for a long time, but that era is coming to a crashing end. We are talking about specific orders that tell lower courts to stop dragging their feet on the Second Amendment. This is about the right to carry in parks, on buses, and in everyday public spaces where you live. This new development changes the math for every police officer and every law-abiding citizen in America. I am going to break down exactly what happened, why the media is missing the real story, and how this affects your daily safety. Staying ahead of these fast legal changes is the only way to protect yourself and your family. Serious and informed people know that the law moves quickly, and you cannot afford to be the last one to find out. If you value clear updates without the political spin, make sure you are subscribed so you never miss a beat. We track these cases every day so you can stay on the right side of the law while exercising your rights. Being part of this community means you are choosing to be prepared instead of being surprised by a sudden change in the rules. Now let's get into the heart of this massive Supreme Court update and what it means for your carry rights. The Supreme Court recently issued a series of orders that sent a clear message to the lower federal courts. They are focusing on cases involving sensitive places, which is a fancy way of saying gun-free zones. For a long time, cities and states have been expanding these zones to include almost every public area. They claimed that parks, hospitals, and even public sidewalks were too sensitive for firearms. The Supreme Court is now stepping in to say that these bans might violate the Constitution. This is happening because the lower courts have been trying to find loopholes in previous rulings like the Bruen case from 2022. The Bruen ruling was a huge win, but many local politicians decided they simply would not follow it. They passed new laws that made it almost impossible to carry a gun anywhere useful. They created a giant map of gun-free zones that covered almost every inch of major cities. This left ordinary people confused and at risk of accidentally breaking a law they didn't even know existed. The Supreme Court has noticed this pattern of resistance and is starting to lose its patience with these lower courts. These recent orders are like a supervisor telling a lazy employee to finally get back to work and follow the manual. When the Supreme Court issues an order like this, it often tells a lower court to look at the case again. This is called a GVR, which stands for grant, vacate, and remand. It means the High Court is wiping out a bad lower court decision and forcing them to try again. This usually happens when the Supreme Court thinks the lower court ignored the law or made a huge mistake. By doing this, the justices are making it clear that they are watching every move these local governments make. They are not going to let states like New York, California, or Illinois just ignore the Second Amendment. What do you think about these local governments trying to create gun-free zones everywhere you go? Do you feel safer in these zones, or do you think they just turn law-abiding citizens into easy targets? Drop a comment below and let me know if your local area has recently changed where you can carry. It is important for us to see how these rules are actually being felt on the ground in different states. Also, if this breakdown is helping you make sense of the legal mess, hit that like button to help more people see this. Your engagement helps us keep this channel going so we can keep fighting for the truth. The big problem right now is the confusion created by these overlapping and conflicting state laws. You might be legal to carry in one town, but then you cross an invisible line and become a criminal. This is not an accident. Many states want to make carrying a gun so complicated that you just give up. They want the risk of a felony to be so high that you leave your protection at home. The Supreme Court's new interest in these cases is aimed at stopping that kind of legal harassment. They want a single, clear standard that applies to every American regardless of which state they happen to be standing in. Think of it like the rules of the road for driving a car. You expect a red light to mean stop and a green light to mean go no matter what city you are in. Imagine if every town had its own secret colors for traffic lights and you had to guess. You would eventually get into a crash or get a massive ticket just for trying to get to work. That is exactly what these local gun bans have done to the Second Amendment. The Supreme Court is trying to restore the same set of rules for everyone so you don't need a law degree to go to the grocery store. Here's what this means for you in your everyday life. If you are a concealed carry holder, you are probably used to checking signs and worrying about where you can step. This Supreme Court order suggests that those signs might soon lose their legal power in many public places. If a park is public land, the court is signaling that the government cannot just ban guns there because they feel like it. They have to prove that there is a long historical tradition of banning guns in that specific type of place. Since most of these bans are brand new, they are likely to fail that test and be struck down. For a parent taking their kids to a public playground, this is a huge deal for personal safety. You should not have to choose between being a victim and being a criminal just because you are in a park. For someone who uses public transit to get to work late at night, this could be a literal lifesaver. These are the real-world stakes that the Supreme Court is finally starting to address with these orders. They are moving away from abstract legal theories and looking at how these laws affect your ability to protect yourself. This shift in focus is exactly why the anti-gun groups are starting to panic right now. Imagine you are driving through a neighboring state and you stop at a rest area to stretch your legs. In some states, that rest area might be designated as a sensitive place where carrying a gun is a serious crime. You might have a valid permit, but the local law says your permit is no good on state-owned property. This is the kind of trap that these local restrictions create for unsuspecting and honest people. The Supreme Court's move is designed to dismantle these traps and ensure your rights travel with you. It is about making sure the Constitution is not something that vanishes the moment you step into a public building. We are just getting started with the hidden consequences of this ruling, and there is a massive trap waiting for people who aren't paying attention. Most people think a court order means the law changes instantly, but that is not how the system works. If you want to know how to stay safe while the courts fight this out, you need to stay tuned for the next few minutes. I am going to reveal the specific trap that could still land you in jail even if the Supreme Court is on your side. Subscribe now to make sure you get the follow-up on this, because the next few months will be a legal roller coaster. There is a big myth going around that these Supreme Court orders mean you can now carry anywhere you want. That is a very dangerous mistake to make, and it could lead to a quick arrest. While the High Court is signaling that these bans are likely unconstitutional, the bans are often still on the books for now. A police officer on the street has to enforce the laws as they are written today, not as they might be in a year. You cannot tell an officer that you are following a Supreme Court order if the local law still says otherwise. You have to wait for the lower courts to actually strike down the specific law in your area. Another myth is that this only matters in big cities like New York or Los Angeles. The reality is that these orders set a precedent that every small town and county must follow. If a tiny town in the middle of nowhere decides to ban guns in its local square, they are now on notice. They can be sued, and they will likely lose, which means they will have to pay massive legal fees. This creates a ripple effect that discourages local politicians from passing unconstitutional laws in the first place. It puts the power back into the hands of the citizens and forces the government to respect your rights. Think of it like a new building code that says every house must have a fire alarm. Just because the code was passed doesn't mean every house magically has an alarm the next morning. It takes time for the builders to go out and install them and for the inspectors to check the work. The Supreme Court has updated the legal building code for the entire country. Now we are in the middle of the phase where the old unsafe structures are being torn down. You need to be patient and wait for the official word in your specific state before you change how you carry your firearm. Let's look at a realistic scenario where this confusion could cause a major problem for you. You are at a local community festival that is being held in a public square that is usually open to everyone. Because it is a special event, the city council passed a temporary rule saying no firearms are allowed for the weekend. You have your permit and you are carrying concealed, thinking you are perfectly legal because it is public property. A security guard sees your holster when you reach for your wallet and calls a police officer over. Under the old rules, you could be facing a felony charge and losing your rights forever. Under the new guidance from the Supreme Court, that city council rule is likely illegal from the start. However, the officer might still arrest you because that temporary rule is still being enforced by the city. This is the gap between what the Constitution says and what happens on the street during a stressful encounter. Your lawyer would eventually use the Supreme Court's order to get the charges dropped, but you still had to go through the arrest. This is why it is so important to stay informed and be extra cautious while these cases are moving through the system. We want you to win the legal battle, but we would rather you avoid the battle entirely. Another scenario involves traveling across state lines with a firearm in your vehicle. Many states have laws that require you to lock your gun in a box and keep it out of reach while driving through their territory. They might also ban you from bringing that gun into a gas station or a restaurant while you are passing through. These are exactly the kinds of carry restrictions that are now in the crosshairs of the Supreme Court. The court is looking for a way to make sure your right to self-defense doesn't stop at the state border. They want to ensure that a traveler from a free state isn't treated like a criminal just for passing through a restrictive one. Here is where this gets even more serious for every gun owner in America. The bigger issue is that some states are already planning ways to get around these new Supreme Court orders. They are looking at private property laws and trying to flip the script on concealed carry. Some states have tried to say that carrying on any private property is illegal unless the owner puts up a sign saying it is okay. This turns the entire tradition of American law upside down and makes every store and parking lot a potential trap. The Supreme Court is aware of this trick, and their recent orders suggest they are ready to strike those laws down too. The part that should worry you is how fast the government can move when they want to restrict your rights. They can pass a new law in a single night, but it takes years of expensive lawsuits to get that law overturned. This creates a period of time where you are living under a law that is clearly unconstitutional but still being enforced. During this time, the risk is all on you, the law-abiding citizen, while the politicians face no consequences for their actions. This is why we have to be vocal and stay united as a community of informed owners. We need to hold these officials accountable for every unconstitutional rule they try to shove down our throats. There is a myth that the Supreme Court is just being political and trying to help one side or the other. In reality, they are simply returning to the actual text of the Constitution and the history of our country. For decades, judges were making up their own rules about what they thought was good policy for public safety. They were acting like mini legislators instead of judges who are supposed to interpret the law. The current Supreme Court is saying that judges don't get to decide what is good policy. The Constitution already decided that. This is a return to the rule of law, and it is a win for everyone who believes in limited government. Think of it like a game of football where the referees start making up their own rules in the middle of the fourth quarter. If the refs decide that touchdowns are now only worth 3 points because they think the game is too high scoring, the game falls apart. The players wouldn't know how to play, and the fans would be furious because the rules were changed without warning. The Supreme Court is the head referee of the United States, and they are telling the lower-level refs to stick to the rule book. They are bringing order back to a system that has been chaotic and unfair for a very long time. Let's talk about another myth, the idea that more guns in public places automatically leads to more danger. This is the argument that many cities use to justify their gun-free zones and carry restrictions. However, the data often shows the opposite, and more importantly, the Constitution doesn't have an "unless it makes people nervous" clause. Your rights are not subject to a public opinion poll or a study from a biased university. The Supreme Court is making it clear that the Second Amendment is a top-tier right, just like freedom of speech or religion. You don't lose your right to speak your mind just because you are in a public park, and you shouldn't lose your right to protect yourself either. Here is what most people still don't see. The next big fight is going to be about what counts as a sensitive place at all. The Supreme Court has said that schools and government buildings can be gun-free zones, but they haven't defined much else. Anti-gun states are trying to claim that everything from a movie theater to a sidewalk is a sensitive place. This is the next frontier of the legal battle, and the recent orders show the court is ready to step in. They are likely going to create a very narrow list of places where guns can be banned, leaving the rest of the world open to carry. This would be a massive shift in how we think about public space and personal safety. The big trap people get burned by is talking too much during a police interaction when they are carrying. If you are stopped and you are in one of these gray area zones, you might feel the need to explain why you think the law is unconstitutional. That is a huge mistake that can only hurt you in the long run. The side of the road is not the place to argue Supreme Court precedent with an officer who has a job to do. Your job is to stay calm, be polite, and let your lawyer handle the constitutional arguments in court later. Knowing the law is about knowing when to speak and when to keep your mouth shut for your own protection. This is where the next fight starts, and it is going to involve the way carry permits are issued. Some states are still trying to make the process so hard and expensive that most people can't afford to exercise their rights. They are adding mandatory training that costs hundreds of dollars or making people wait for a year to get a plastic card. The Supreme Court has already hinted that these delays and high costs might also be unconstitutional. If you can't afford to pay the government for a permit, you still have the right to defend your life. We are going to see a lot of movement on this front as the court continues to clean up these restrictive state policies. We need to correct the take that these rulings are only a win for gun nuts or extremists. This is a win for the single mother walking to her car in a dark parking lot after a long shift. It is a win for the elderly couple who wants to feel safe while they take a walk in their local park. These are ordinary people who just want the same level of safety that the politicians have with their armed security details. When the Supreme Court protects the Second Amendment, they are protecting the most basic human right of all, the right to stay alive. This is about dignity and the ability to take responsibility for your own well-being and that of your family. Think of it like a fire extinguisher in a kitchen. You hope you never have to use it and you go about your day without thinking about it most of the time. But if a grease fire starts on your stove, that extinguisher is the only thing that matters in that moment. You wouldn't accept a law that says you can only have a fire extinguisher in your bedroom, but not in your kitchen. That would be a stupid and dangerous rule that ignores how real life actually works. The Supreme Court is finally applying that same common sense to the tools we use for personal protection in public. Now let's recap the 3 most important things you need to take away from this Supreme Court update. First, the High Court is actively watching lower courts and will not let them ignore the Second Amendment anymore. Second, many local gun-free zones are legally shaky and will likely be struck down in the coming months. Third, you must still follow your local laws for now to avoid arrest, even if those laws are eventually going to be overturned. Being right about the Constitution doesn't protect you from a pair of handcuffs if the law is still on the books today. Stay patient and stay informed so you can move safely as the legal landscape changes for the better. This matters in the long term because it is about the kind of country we are going to leave for our children. Do we want a country where your rights depend on which zip code you are standing in? Or do we want a country where the Constitution means what it says from coast to coast? By standing up for carry rights now, we are ensuring that the next generation doesn't have to fight these same battles. We are restoring the balance of power between the citizen and the state, which is the whole point of the Bill of Rights. This is about freedom, safety, and the peace of mind that comes from knowing you can protect what matters most. You have a responsibility to yourself and your family to stay on top of these issues. Making a mistake because you didn't know the law changed is a tragedy that is completely preventable. We are living through a historic shift in American law, and you have a front row seat to the restoration of your rights. Don't let the noise and the headlines distract you from the practical steps you need to take to stay safe and legal. Keep training, keep carrying responsibly, and keep your eyes on the courts as they continue to do this important work. The road to freedom is often long and complicated, but we are making real progress every single day. If you want to stay informed without the bias and the fluff, you belong in this community of serious gun owners. We refuse to stay uninformed while the government tries to chip away at our basic rights and safety. Subscribe to the channel right now to join a group of people who value the truth and the Constitution above all else. Your support helps us keep the pressure on and keep the updates coming as fast as the news breaks. Drop a comment and tell me, which local carry restriction do you want to see the Supreme Court strike down next? Let's get the conversation started and keep the momentum moving forward for all of our rights.